What's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm Cody Goodwin, joined today by our senior writer, John Talty. We're here to recap Alabama's season opening win over Middle Tennessee. Final score on Saturday night, 56-7 at Bryant-Denny Stadium. John, let's start here. Is your Coke bottle a crystal ball?
I wish it was. As Nick Saban said, that would make things easier. Sadly, it is not. But that won't stop me from trying to make projections moving forward.
We're going to do a little bit of that today. Obviously, we're just recapping the game for the most part. And I think the biggest takeaway from this week one game, of course, the quarterback play, right? Jalen Milroe, very, very good. Some might even say he was great or spectacular, or at least he had great or spectacular moments. Final line, 13 for 18 passing, 194 yards, 3 touchdowns, rushed for another 64 yards, 2 more touchdowns. He looked every bit like the QB1 that Nick Saban, I think, was hoping would emerge from this 3-man race that lingered throughout fall camp. He also made history, by the way, becoming the first Alabama quarterback to throw for 3 touchdowns and also rush for 2 touchdowns in a single game, which is kind of cool. John, when it comes to Milroe's performance overall and just the way we're thinking about the quarterback battle, air quotes, what stood out to you the most?
Yeah, I think he did what he had to do. I think we had some questions coming into this game. I think some of the big questions were, what was the kind of rotation and rep breakdown going to be? And I think Jalen got even more reps than I kind of thought he would. I think it's clear that he separated himself maybe even more than we thought based on how they were breaking down first-team reps during scrimmages and practices and things like that. So that was interesting to me. But I think part two is just I think we wondered, can he be pretty much mistake-free, which I think for the most part he was. Obviously, no turnovers, was able to make some plays that could have been mistakes and turn them into spectacular stuff like that. Touchdown run he had on the bad snap from Seth McLaughlin. So, I mean, that was impressive. And I think we wondered, what was he like as a passer? What kind of improvement? And I think we saw steps forward in that area. I think we'll nitpick more in the future. There's some nitpicky things that you can wonder when they're not going against Middle Tennessee State, if some of those plays are going to work out the way that they did. I think that's a fair question. But overall, he looked good out there. He looked pretty comfortable out there. I thought he made some athletic plays, and it's clear the team likes him and rallied around him. And so I felt, pretty good about what he did out there last night.
Yeah, I think the athleticism was not so much a question. It was kind of neat that was maybe the first thing that we got to see out of him, right? The bad snap, he picks it up. One thing I noticed on the immediate replay was that he kept his eyes downfield. Like, he still looked like he wanted to throw the ball for a split second before he decided to tuck it and run it and let his speed do the rest. But yeah, the biggest thing I was just kind of curious about when it came to Milroe, and I figured Middle Tennessee would be a good, can they work some of these things out, was just the whole deep passing thing, right? Because he just was not good at that last year. Like, they kept a lot of his stuff short and intermediate. That's where he was good. That's where he was effective, especially in the short passing. Very, very good at that last year. I was curious, are they going to take some deep shots? It took a little while to maybe work some of those into the game. But he had 3 deep shot touchdown passes last night, right? 40+ to both Isaiah Bond, Jermaine Burton, 29-yarder to Amari Niblack. He had only completed in his college career, which he's only a redshirt sophomore, so we're only talking, 3 seasons, or this is the start of his 3rd season. He had only completed 1 pass that had gone 20+ yards downfield before last night, and last night he completes 3 of them. That was good. Like, big thumbs up. I don't know that it's question answered, but you can do that. Like, you put that on tape now that's a thing that you can do. And that's an encouraging sign if you're an Alabama fan, right? Like, that's the fact that he can do that now. He even said it last night. Like, that's an element of his game that they need to have to be successful moving forward. I know there was a lot of talk through fall camp about running the ball and the offensive line wanting to make people quit, and just the depth at running back and the size of the offensive line, this, that, and the next, all that stuff. It ain't going to work out too much when you get into SEC play and all these big defenses start stacking the box because your quarterback can't hit one over the top. Again, just Middle Tennessee, but he hit a few passes over the top. And that, I thought, was not the most encouraging sign, but generally speaking, a very encouraging sign, at least against an inferior opponent in week 1 for Jalen Milroe. I thought that was good.
And I think that's probably a good thing to put on tape for Texas, right? I think I was thinking earlier, some of what they're doing a little vanilla to not want to put anything too exotic on tape ahead of Texas. But I think that's something that actually is beneficial to, okay, this guy can hit the deep ball. Like we can't just stack the box. Like we are going to have to prepare for that. And I think, maybe we'll talk about him more later. Like I thought Isaiah Bond had a really good game. And I think he's a guy that showed you some things like, okay, there's a connection here. We can use him in different ways. And I was rewatching his touchdown before jumping on of you here, Cody. And he had a good step plus past his guy. He absolutely burned him. And Jalen put the ball maybe a little late, but it was pretty good ball, pretty good spot to put it in. And so that was such a struggle last year, guys getting separation. And so if Bond can keep doing that as the level of, competition increases, I think that's a really encouraging sign too. But you're right. That was a real question for Jalen. And I think again, I don't know if it's a full answer, but it's, the way that I come away from this experience is he passed the test, right? I think he did, like, if it was a pass fail, he passed. Now, I think it's too soon to say whether he aced it or if he's going to be an A student or whatever kind of classroom analogies we want to use here. But I think from the first test, you wanted him to look pretty good, show improvement, not make major mistakes. I think he passed in all of those areas.
Yeah. Obviously a threat to run the ball. The 21-yarder was fun, right? Like, and it was cool, and it's going to be the one that's going to play on highlights. But he had another touchdown run where it was an RPO. He pulled it down, followed his tight ends. A lot of 12 personnel last night, by the way, which was big thumbs up from this guy. But no, he's, clearly they've given him the green light to run the ball as well, which, it just, when we were talking about the quarterback battle throughout the preseason, just Milroe's ability. They can all run the ball, right? They all have that capability, but just Milroe's speed is just a little bit different than Tyler Buckner and Ty Simpson. And so that was on display last night a couple different times. You mentioned Isaiah Bond, that 5 catches for 76 yards and a touchdown, led all receivers. And they got a lot of pass catchers involved, right? 8 different guys caught a ball. Jalen Hale caught a ball. Malik Benson got some targets. A lot of tight ends got to play last night, but only, Amari Niblack caught 2 passes. CJ Dupre caught just 1. So kind of going all over the place here, but bringing it back to the quarterbacks, Milroe looked like QB1. But both Tyler Buckner and Ty Simpson they each got 2 drives each at the end of the game. They both ended up scoring rushing touchdowns. I think we all kind of presume that after this game that Milroe's probably going to be your starter against Texas, probably going to get the vast majority of the snaps, barring something unforeseen. What does that mean for Tyler Buckner and Ty Simpson moving forward? It seems pretty simple to be they're number 2 and number 3, and that's kind of it. But, Saban had been adamant, and he even kind of hinted about it last night that, performance in week 1 doesn't guarantee anything moving forward. But what do we make of this now? Is it done? Is the cake done baking, or what are your thoughts?
No, I don't think it is done baking. I think it could be done baking, but if we're just going to get all kinds of weird analogies today. But if I'm baking a cake, and to be clear, I'm not very good at baking, so this might be bad. But I'm peeking through the oven, but I don't think I'm pulling it out yet. I'm checking it. I'm it might be ready, but I don't know if I want to pull it out yet because it might not be fully cooked. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think you have to see what he does against Texas. I think that's. And, I wrote in a column today, as much as we all cared about who's going to start week 1, to me, it has always been more about, do you feel good about a guy heading into week 2, right? So I think you can feel good about Jalen headed into week 2, but do you feel good about Jalen headed into week 3? That's the next huge question. And I don't think we know the answer to that yet. I don't think, to me, we saw enough against Middle Tennessee State to say definitively, oh man, this is clearly the guy and he's going to crush Texas or whatever. I don't think it's too big of a gap in competition, I think, between what we saw Middle Tennessee State and what we're going to see with Texas. So I think that Milroe will get the start. I think that unless he is either gets hurt or is playing horribly. I think he's the only quarterback you see in week one, and excuse me, in week two. But whether he is the guy past that, I think depends on how he plays. Like, I think that the fact that Saban over and over again has said essentially, this is just the beginning, it's not the end. Just because a guy starts doesn't mean he's always going to be the starter. I mean, he's clearly given himself some outs to switch up QBs down the line. And he's clearly sending a message to that room that to Jalen, just because you start week one doesn't mean you're always going to be the guy. And I think to Tyler and Ty, just because you didn't start week one doesn't mean you won't be the starter moving forward. I think he's purposely trying to stoke competition in that room moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think when it comes to the most interesting, not the most interesting thing, one of the more interesting things I think I took away from last night was I think the guys understand that. I mean, I know we talked to Milroe last night after the game. First time that we've talked to any of the quarterbacks, basically since the spring. And it was like what struck me, and I know I kind of told you this last night, like very, very different from the Milroe that talked after last year's Texas A&M game. Yeah. Like even different from the guy that probably talked after the Arkansas game. Like he talked after those games and he was just like, yeah, like I'm happy we got the win. There's things I got to work on, but I'm really going to enjoy this. Just like really peachy and smiley. And like, you wouldn't know that he had just played erratically in that A&M game. And then last night he shows up, talks for 6 minutes, and it's like he's been Sabanized completely, like just super business-like. I need to play better. I got to do better. Like I got to do this. I got to do that, yada, yada, after hanging 56 on Middle Tennessee State. I know that two different opponents, probably feeling different after an SEC win, being thrown into the fire like that compared to an inferior week one foe, but just different. It looks like we're dealing with a different cat this year. I'd like to think that that's pretty much a good thing. If you're Alabama, that's where his focus is at after a lopsided win where he played pretty good.
I think it absolutely is. I mean, I think it's like you said, like, I think it's a difference between a guy stepping in as a backup and like, hey, I did the best I could versus I'm now the guy and the expectations are higher.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting. And I wonder what that means moving forward, right? We don't get, cracked open windows into these guys' psyche all the time, but I did find that a little interesting, at least in comparison to last year. That's the quarterbacks. The other prevailing takeaway I thought from last night's game was that Alabama, by and large, looked like the fourth-ranked team in the country, or at least they looked how the fourth-ranked team in the country probably should look against an inferior week one opponent. On offense, they scored on 8 of 11 drives, put up 447 total yards of offense, 226 passing, 221 rushing. They only had 1 3-and-out. The defense allowed just 211 yards. They recorded 3 sacks. They forced 2 turnovers. Overall, they look good. They did what they were supposed to do. Middle Tennessee's kind of scrappy, but obviously significantly overmatched. When you look at the team performance overall, quarterbacks aside, what was your biggest takeaway from last night's game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a kind of a survive and advance type mentality of like, there are teams who struggle every year week one. I was watching before Alabama's game, TCU is more than a 20-point favorite and ranked against Colorado and lost. And so I think there's some difference in those two, but like sometimes you just got to just do what you got to do and just deliver and, then move on to the next one. I thought Alabama absolutely did that. I think defense looked good. I think certainly some questions about some injuries, guys getting banged up. You hope that they're back in time for Texas because I thought both of them played pretty well, especially Jalen Key. I thought he had a really strong first game in Alabama. You really hope that guy's okay, and I think he will be, but we'll find out more probably on Monday when Nick Saban talks to the media. But beyond that, like I mentioned, Bond, I felt he had a strong day. I thought that was important. I think if I'm going to nitpick a little bit now, I think some questions around the offensive line, just in terms of, and Saban said this too, protection-wise, they were great. I think, you go back to that Milroe Bond touchdown. Milroe had a lot of time. Like he had plenty of time to uncork one. And I thought they did a really good job in that area. And, I know you're going to rewatch the game and I'll try to rewatch it as well. We'll see maybe things pop up that I didn't notice in the moment, but it felt like Caden Proctor played well outside of, McLaughlin's botch snap seemed like he played well. But in terms of the overpowering run game type stuff. I didn't see that. I don't think that we saw, like, it felt like we're going to go more ground and pound. I know you were excited about the 12 personnel, but it didn't feel like there were huge holes for the running backs to go through. You know, it felt like more, again, the best runs are probably Milrow making something out of nothing. So I'm kind of curious about what that means moving forward, especially against Texas next week. But overall, I think offense did well. Defense played well. I think there's a lot of guys who, made an impact. Quindarius Robinson, wasn't really thinking much about him heading into the game, and I thought he had a really good day, really impactful, and Braswell and some of these other guys. So I think it's felt good overall about it. But there's some things that you wonder what they mean projection wise moving forward.
Yeah, no, you and I were talking about the offensive line last night, and like they looked fine. They didn't it's not like it was Crimson Tide Moving Company out there in the trenches. Like they weren't exactly blowing guys over, but they weren't like getting beat,
Right.
the couple of sacks that Milrow took, pass protection from the running backs, like Roydell and Jam got blown over by the oncoming rusher. Like that one, that can't happen. But two, like that's not on the offensive line. That was their assignments. They got to figure that out. But yeah, like you said, like they're not bad, but not great, right? Like they were talking about making people quit. Like I think Middle Tennessee is a team that you probably should make them quit, right? Like, and they rushed for 221 yards. 64 of those came from Milrow. So really 150 some rushing yards, and that includes, Simpson had, a sneak and a couple runs. Buckner had a 9-yard touchdown run. So really less than 150 rushing yards from your primary ball carriers. Like I'd like to see a little bit more of that. If we're picking nits a little bit. Talked about the wide receivers like Isaiah Bond, Jermaine Burton, Kobe Prentice had a 3 catches. Amari Niblack had a couple catches. Looked good blocking downfield too. I know that's something that probably made Nick Saban and Tommy Rees really excited. Defensively, a guy that popped, and there were quite a few guys that popped. Caleb Downs. Talking about freshmen that step in and play. And again, it's Middle Tennessee State. Let's see what they do against Texas. Same thing goes for Caden Proctor, who at left tackle, first left tackle true freshman starter since Cam Robinson in 2014. So shout out Southeast Polk High School. He didn't look bad. He didn't look fantastic. Like, again, he wasn't killing people. He had a few really good reps, but other true freshman, Caleb Downs, led the team in tackles, had a tackle for loss. The dude was he was good. He was good. He wasn't great, but he was good. Like he seemed like he knew exactly where he had to go every single play. He didn't look like he got beat. He flashed speed. He's a surefire tackler. Like I don't know that he missed a tackle at all. I know this was a guy that Nick Saban's been excited about, a guy that we've heard a lot about throughout the preseason. Week 1 test, like talk about guys that are passing tests. Like that guy not only passed the game test, but also passed the eye test. This kid looks like he could really be special.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on something that our colleague Kirk McNair asked Saban about after the game. But tackling, there's some questions around that, and it was clearly a priority. And as a whole, they did a good job at tackling. And I think that Caleb obviously led the way there, and I think he absolutely passed the eye test. And there are multiple guys. I'm not saying it was 100% perfect, obviously, but there were a lot of guys who I thought who played well. They did what they needed to do. There weren't a lot of penalties. That was a major issue last season, and they didn't have major issues there. That was, I think, encouraging. But yeah, I mean, Downs got a lot of offseason hype, and I think being compared to Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's one of the best defensive backs I've seen at Alabama since I've been covering them, before you even play a single snap is hard, I think, and I think that would be hard for some kids to live up to. And again, it's only week 1, who knows what will happen in the future. But I think he absolutely answered that call in week 1. And I think it's understandable why so many people believe so highly in this kid. And I think from everything you hear, like mentally, football IQ, like this kid is just really special.
Yeah. Just absolutely looked the part, didn't look out of place as a true freshman. I mean, this guy was playing high school ball last year. Now he's playing Division I. Couple other, you mentioned the penalties, only 2 penalties for 19 yards against Alabama last night. None of them were like super glaring or, I guess neither of them were super glaring. And then also, I know it's early and I know people feel some type of way about Pro Football Focus, but they said that Alabama only had 5 total missed tackles. I'm excited to see where they were in going back and rewatching the game, but I just watching it live, it kind of like you and Kirk were saying, just didn't look like they missed many, if at all. They gang tackled. They did really well. I know that, in the secondary, there were maybe a couple of missed assignments here and there. And, they were doing Middle Tennessee was doing some funny stuff pre-snap, which, like early in the game, they were pulling Tresman Marshall out of the middle, which opened up big running lanes for the quarterback. He had that 30-yarder early on the drive where they ultimately missed the field goal. But, by and large, I thought the defense played pretty sound. You want to see them overpower a team like Middle Tennessee, and overall, I thought they did. The pass rush looked fine. One of the interesting things about the depth chart reveal, interesting to me, I don't know about anybody else, but like they kicked Jaheim Otis out to defensive end so that they were able to start Tim Keenan at nose guard, and then you had Justin Aboigbe at the other defensive end spot. I curious to rewatch it. But that was kind of interesting to me. I know Tim Smith was the other projected defensive end. And so, Saban had said that he needed to see a little bit more consistency out of him. Also speaks to Otis's versatility that he's able to play basically anywhere on the defensive line. I thought they mostly had a pretty good day. At least there was nothing like super glaring about the defensive line just off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's one of those ones too where I feel like I need to go back and watch it because on first, when you're just watching it live at the game, I don't know if I noticed Otis doing a ton. He wasn't a guy who really flashed to me the way I feel like some other guys did. But I'm sure going back and watching it closer, you will see that he made an impact on the defensive line. I'm sure that he did. But like you said, it felt like the defensive line didn't do anything bad, but I don't know if they had those major impact plays. And I'll give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And I think Saban talked about this too. When you're trying to get the ball out fast, there's just not a lot of opportunities where you're going to get a lot of quarterback hits and sacks and things like that. Their offense was geared toward getting the ball out quick. And so, there's only so much you can do in that regard. But I thought overall didn't seem like there are any glaring issues there.
Yeah, 100%. Figure we can wrap up here. We kind of been doing it a little bit here and there throughout the show, but if you were to, what's the biggest nit that you're going to pick with Alabama's performance last night? I know we've talked about Milroe. We've talked about small things like the run game. Maybe wanted to see a little bit more of that. What are some other small areas that, not emergency lights flashing, but little things you might be keeping an eye on, over this next week and really in the Texas game?
Yeah, I mean, those are some of the big ones for me. I think we also kind of hit on it a little bit. But, it felt like there was definitely a downgrade at star when Malachi Moore went out and Earl Little came in. It felt like they went after him a bit. So, and, the early buzz has been that, Malachi might be dealing with an ankle sprain. And so, if he's not ready to go full go or he's not able to play, that concerns me a bit, I think, for the Texas game. Just, again, I think you have a week to prepare, and that I think will help Earl if he has to step in there. But it just felt like he made a couple mistakes. So that would be, I think, one of them for me. And then, yeah, I mean, offensive line, just you would have liked to have seen them dominate a little bit more in the run game. But again, I thought they looked really good protection-wise, and that was an issue. That's been an issue the last couple of years at times. So kind of a mixed bag there in some regard, but I'd like to see how that impacts next week again against a Texas team that's a good bit better. And then the last one is just, and it's not even they didn't do anything wrong. It's just just the timing between receivers and Milroe on some of those bigger plays. Even Saban, when he was asked about the explosive plays, was basically no offense to those guys, but we're going to have to do this against a much better caliber team. And you could just tell, I mean, they were just so much better than that secondary that if Isaiah Bond is only able to get a little bit of a step and not the full step and a half that he had, can Milroe put the ball right on the money the way he needs to? It's a little bit of a question for me. But again, it's they are truly nitpicks. There's no panic button stuff. There's no, oh man, this is going to be a huge issue down the line. It's all just, they did it. They did well. They won easily. You can't get that mad about a huge blowout win. It's just all just tiny things that when the level of play jumps up multiple levels, is that a bigger issue?
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. Talking about Milrose, some of those like out routes, like they were, kind of more shallow toward the sideline. I think those are the kind of passes that you really want to see a lot of zip on. And a few of us made this comment in the press box. Some of those passes just kind of floated, right? And like better defensive backs, like better athletes on, a Texas defense, for example, probably going to jump that and, pass breakup more likely, or possibly if they're that freak of an athlete, that could be a pick six right there, right? So
watching TCU Colorado, Travis Hunter probably would have picked six that one or two of those passes that Miller made. I mean, like you said, it definitely, that one, I think we talked about it. You and I are sitting next to each other in the press box. Like that pass to Jermaine Burton just felt like it hung up there, and it was a completion, but you just can't do that. And it's weird. He has a strong arm. I don't know. I don't know. I don't understand. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was, if we're picking nits here, like little things like that, like you kind of maybe want to see a few more darts, or just, if you're starting the drive or starting the play on one hash, don't, maybe throw across to the other until you feel confident about that throw. That could be one thing. I'm trying to think, like, it's also kind of hard to nitpick because like you said, huge blowout too. I wonder how vanilla they did keep the offense, because Texas was probably watching that game. They're obviously going to go in and watch the film. Like there's, let's get in and get out and beat up on a lower team without giving away too much type vibe last night. I don't want to say that they were holding plays, but they probably didn't install a ton, right? Or at least, I don't know. Like that's another, not a nitpick, but like just a thought that popped into my head. Like, if we're going to, how limited was the offense? How much more will we see when they play Texas next week? I think that's, do they get the tight ends more involved in the passing game? Do they install a few more RPOs for Milroe? Do they incorporate more, rushing concepts for the offensive line? I don't know. Like that's, these are obviously things we're going to ask Saban about this coming week. Right. So,
sure.
The other, the injuries in the secondary, I think, are also kind of worrisome. Just knowing what we know about Texas, right? Like Quinn Ewers came out last year and just, before he got hurt, right? Only a couple drives, looked fairly good, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And, that was with 2 All-American safeties in the secondary. Alabama doesn't quite know if they have that yet. I mean, they've got a lot of talent in the secondary. And, even after both Jalen Key, who had an interception, and Malachi Moore, who played pretty well, after they went out, they were able to kind of shuffle the secondary a little bit, and they gave up a touchdown. Like Earl Little had, a couple of missed assignments there, but, that's where the depth is probably going to come through, depending on what Moore and Key's situation is. It'll be kind of interesting, right? Because that's, Texas beat Rice 37-10, kind of similar where it's, lower team. They went in, did their job, but, I'm looking at, Xavier Worthy's coming. They got a really good tight end. We mentioned Ewers. I know that, Cole Kublik on the SEC Network broadcast was making a huge deal about Alabama's offensive line. And then immediately I saw a lot of Texas guys who were like, well, their defensive line for the Longhorns is just as big. So like, that's going to be one of the matchups that we're all looking forward to seeing. And we'll get more into, between this podcast and other podcasts, we'll break down Alabama, Texas this coming week. But, yeah, and we mentioned this on previous shows too. Like when you're Alabama and you start the season as the number 4 team in the country and your goal is to get to the playoff and win a national title, like these nitpicks matter. Like that is why I built it into the show, as things that we need to, what are things that we need to keep an eye on moving forward, because not that you need to be 110% perfect all the time, but like you better iron out some of these things pretty quick before the SEC schedule hits. Otherwise you're not getting where you want to go. And
I guarantee you, Nick Saban, when he does his good, bad, and the ugly film review, it's not all good. There will be bad and there will be ugly. I mean, there's no way that it's all perfect, and it's never going to be this early on. And so it's just like you said, it's the standard, and they talk about the Alabama standard all the time, but that is what it is. Like that is kind of part of, like, we hold Alabama to a very high standard. It's not about, you and I both went to schools that would, be happy of 8-4 and 9-3 and all that. Like that's not what the standard is here at Alabama. And so, you don't want to be overly negative, but it's like even watching Milroe or the wide receivers, like it's just looking at those little things. It's like, can this be a bigger problem when they have to play Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee? Those are the games that really matter. And that's what you're building toward. And the exciting thing is that we're getting a really interesting game week 2. We're getting a game that could in many ways determine a lot of how this season turns out for Alabama, and so that's what's exciting is we're getting some real big boy football in week 2.
Yeah, at the very least, I think it'll set the tone for what the rest of the season could look like. Yeah, that's kind of all I had. John, you got any other final thoughts here before we sign off?
Well, the only other thing that I feel like we didn't really hit on, and I don't think we need to spend more than a minute on it, but like, what did you, for all the talk, we've mostly just talked about Milroe. What did you think about Ty Simpson and Tyler Buckner?
I feel bad for Ty Simpson because I think that dude just wants to go out there and throw the ball. And in 5 appearances, he has thrown 6 passes. Like he's completed 5 of them for like 35, 40 yards. But like, I don't know. That's, that goes back to player coach thing. He's obviously not showing what Saban wants to see. Not to get terribly morbid, but I wonder about, okay, where is Ty Simpson going to be here next year? If that's
Sure.
where he's currently at right now, not going to speculate, but like, I think it's a question worth asking given today's college football climate. We'll see. I guess I was a little surprised to see Buckner come off the bench first. I kind of, not that I assumed, but just everything we had heard, it just, Milroe was obviously going to get the first snaps. And then I just kind of figured, hey, like Ty Simpson will probably get the second snaps. But Buckner got out there. They each got 2 drives out there. There were 2 different drives. Like they let Buckner throw the ball a little bit. You had made the comment both before and during the game that these guys are a little bit more athletic than maybe people give them credit for, at least when compared to Milroe. And they showed that, right? Like Buckner, RPO, kept it, ran around the corner, scored a touchdown. Simpson had a nice little run, and then he was able to sneak it in for a score. They looked fine. Do we see them against South Florida? If Milroe isn't up to snuff, do we see Buckner against Texas? I guess it was interesting. But I don't know how much more we're going to see of them this year. You look at the schedule and it's like, okay, they get South Florida, but then Ole Miss week 4. And then, Chattanooga, like week 11, like maybe that's when we see them a little bit, and I guess this is all under the presumption that Milroe's going to continue to play like he did last night, which is obviously not a guarantee. He was up and down in his couple of extended performances last season, and there's still very much the case that could happen again this season. But I don't know. Like it kind of comes back to haven't seen a ton of them. We still haven't seen a ton of them. So it's just, I don't really think we know what they have there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And I think if we don't see one of those guys against South Florida, something definitely went wrong, because they should beat up on South Florida. So that's where I think we'll see them next. But you're right. After that, there's probably not going to be a ton of opportunities for those guys if Milroe remains the guy moving forward.
Yeah. So, and it makes me wonder, with, Dylan Lonergan was one of the OR designations. He's only a true freshman. What does that mean for, a Ty Simpson, a Tyler Buckner, if Milroe's able to kind of staple this thing down and make it his over the next couple weeks? I don't know. Like, it's just, these are the thoughts in my head.
For sure.
I think that's it. I appreciate you joining me, John. I know we had a late night last night and an early morning this morning. But we'll be back later this week, probably Wednesday, Thursday-ish, to break down Alabama's week 2 game against the 11th ranked Texas Longhorns. They beat Rice in week 1, 37-10. Last season, Crimson Tide snuck out a thriller against Texas, 20-19. They'll clash next week in what's probably going to be the week 2 game of the week, or at least the most exciting game on the slate. College Game Day is going to be here. SEC Nation's going to be here. Lots to look forward to this next upcoming week. In the meantime, be sure to rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247. Week 1 is now in the books, guys. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again soon.